Is this working? Right? You can hear fine? Yeah. We could turn the lights down a bit too.
Yeah, we can turn the lights down.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank Chuck and Sandy for inviting me here. Chuck, I'm glad you enjoyed the program a few years ago and thought enough to bring me here to Fabius. So I want to tell you a quick other story before I get to Route 20. I was looking at the photos in the hall, and there's a photo of ginseng planting in 1920. I've got a story. I'm a poet mainly, right? So I've got a story about ginseng that I want to tell you, and it has to do with a poem. And I was always into wild plants and foods, and I like gathering and trying the different things that are edible. And I heard ginseng grew in our hills. I live in Steuben County, near Bath, New York, up in the hills there, very remote, up on a hilltop with old Order Amish neighbors. But I was told ginseng grew in our area, but I never found it. And one day I was doing my laundry in the laundromat in Bath, New York, and there was another gentleman there doing his laundry. So we started talking, and I mentioned to him I was a poet. And he goes, "I don't write." Just like that, real gruff, "I don't write." So we didn't talk about poetry anymore. But as we kept talking, he told me he was a ginseng hunter. So I got all excited. "Wow, you hunt ginseng." So I started asking him questions. What kind of woods does it grow in? And north, south, east facing, up high, down low. Just all these questions to help me find ginseng. And then I looked straight at him and I asked, "Can I go with you sometime?" And this is what he said. "I don't take anyone along. If I do, I can't find it. Alone, it's like I'm possessed. I get lost, lose track of time, don't know where I am, and nothing exists except ginseng. That's how I always find it." Wow. Wow. I don't write poetry. As soon as he said that, I knew two things. One, he was talking about so much more than ginseng. I get lost, lose track of time, and also that it was a poem. And so I wanted to write it down in my journal, but I felt funny doing it in the laundromat right there. So I went out to my car and I wrote down his words in my journal. And then my first chapbook of poetry came out a year later, and that poem was in there. It's a found poem. It wasn't meant to be a poem. He said, I heard it as a poem. So it's called Ginseng Hunter, and it was in that first little chapbook of mine. About a month after the book came out, I'm back at the laundromat, and guess who's there? The ginseng hunter. So I got all excited. "Oh, I'm going to show you something," right? So I go out to the car and get a copy of the book, and it's in this book now. That one's no longer out of print, but it's in this book. And I grabbed the poem, and I start walking back to the laundromat, and I hesitated. I didn't know this guy. These were his words. Now they're a poem in my book. He's big, and I'm a pacifist. It's like, But I walked in, and I said, I'm committed. So I walked in, and I held it open to the poem and just handed it to him. I said, "Do you remember this?" And he grabbed the book and got it to that right spacing, and he's reading it. And as he's reading it, I'm just watching his face, and a big smile on his face. All right. And I go, "Remember, I asked you if I could go with you. That's what you said. Remember you said you didn't write poetry? That was a poem." I said, "When you speak from here, from the heart, it's poetry. When you speak from some place you know about, it's poetry." And he was really pleased. I said, "You could have the book." And he said, "Go sign it for me. Sign it right under the poem." So I opened the book to the poem, and I asked him his name. His name was Jack. And I said, "Jack," I wrote down, "To Jack, from whom I stole this poem." And he laughed, And they said, "Well, can I have another book? My son would think this is so cool. Could you sign it for him?" I said, "Sure." So I gave him another book. Then I looked straight at him again. "Can I go with you now?" No? But that was so wonderful because, we all have poems in us. We all have poetry in us. And he was speaking from something that mattered to him, and there was a poem. Okay, let's go on Route 20 on a tour. Can you see this okay? Is it okay light-wise? Yeah? Okay. How many of you knew Route 20 was the longest road in America, or is the longest road in America? Yeah, most people don't know that. Most people don't know. Starts in Boston, ends in Newport, Oregon. And it exists, not like Route 66. Everyone knows Route 66, but that's segments here and there. And Route 20, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so I knew Route 20 going around Buffalo. And in 1996, it was the 25th anniversary of an event that changed my life as a young man. I quit college, I bought a backpack, a tent, and a sleeping bag in 1971, and went on the road with my thumb. And I hitchhiked off and on for 3 years, about 30,000 miles. And it changed my life, totally changed in a real positive way. And in '96, I realized it was the 25th anniversary of that. So I knew I needed to do something special to commemorate that 25th anniversary of the main experience as a young adult. And the thing back in the hitchhiking days, I never went west. Because everyone hitchhiked to Colorado and the Rocky Mountains and California. Even then, I didn't want to do what everyone did. So I went east to the Adirondacks, Green Mountains, White Mountains, Acadia National Park, Nova Scotia. And I always went that direction. So I realized, you know, gee, I never went west. And one day I was driving on Route 20. I didn't know what I was going to do to commemorate that anniversary. And I was driving on Route 20 to do conduct a workshop at the Schweinfurth Art Museum in Auburn. And I was on 20 between Geneva and Auburn, and I thought, you know, I know 20 goes to Boston. I've been on it many times, but, you know, I think it goes all the way out west. But I didn't know. But as I'm driving, I'm thinking about it, and wow, if it goes all the way out west, and the idea came 20 days on Route 20, you know, and it's like, I'll go west for the first time. So I got home at midnight, pulled out the maps, you know, the atlas, and traced it. Boston, you know 20 through New York, parallels 90 to Chicago, then it goes off on its own. Dubuque and Mississippi River, Sioux City, the Missouri River, northern Nebraska, Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, and all the way to Newport, Oregon. And I looked at that, I said, that's what I'm doing, 20 days on Route 20. So I did that journey in 1996, in fall, and I wrote this book about it, this 20 days on Route 20. And it's all about that experience, okay? And it's written in haibun, which is a Japanese form that combines haiku and condensed prose. And it's a wonderful form for travel writing. So I wrote that book. But even before I finished that journey, I knew I wanted to go in spring sometime. This was fall when I did it. I said, what's it like in spring to see the country unfold, you know, as you go west? So in 2010, I planned a journey 28 days on Route 20, Boston to Oregon again. I had 20 different programs set up along the way. And I got all the way to Toledo, and we had a medical emergency back home. I had to turn around and go back home. My son was in the hospital. And so that's ended that trip. But then, you know, things settled down. He was okay eventually. And I said, you know, next spring I'm going to continue. So the very same day that I quit the journey, the 1 year, 2011, I went back to Toledo and continued the journey. So I did it over a 28-day period. There was a year in between that didn't happen, you know. So the photos you're going to see are from that journey. So I'm going to tell some stories with the photos, maybe read a few little segments from the book, and we're all going to go on a journey cross country on Route 20. How many of you have explored Route 20 a little bit beyond just the local area? Anyone ever do the whole trip? No? Okay. Oh, go do it. It's amazing, amazing. So yeah, let's get started. Let's go on a journey. And Walden Pond is not on Route 20. But before I left on the spring journey, I was staying with a friend who lived in North Acton. And from her house to where 20 starts in Boston, I could go right by Walden Pond. And I knew I had to go by Walden Pond. And two reasons, well, one main reason, Henry David Thoreau, of course. And he influenced my life a lot. I remember as a junior in high school reading Thoreau, and two quotes stuck in my mind when I read them as a junior. And they're both about dreams. And one was, if you've been building castles in the air, fine, that's where they belong, I'll put the foundations under them. And then the other one was, if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he has imagined, he will meet with a success unequaled in common hours. When I heard those two quotes, I knew those were important, and they were going to be important to me for the rest of my life. So I had to stop and pay my respects and thanks to Henry David on the way to Boston. And there was the morning, the sun was just coming up, that's Walden Pond, you can see the sun hitting the tops of the trees. And I left that placidness behind and drove to Kenmore Square. This is where Route 20 starts. I got to tell you a story from here. In the book, the 20 Days on Route 20, the information I had was 20 started at the Commons, right downtown Boston. I remember historically, you all know, remember the guides to the states that were written back in the 30s and 40s? Wonderful historic references, you know, different route, you know, tours and that. Well, I was using that for reference, and so I got downtown Boston rush hour in the morning. Mistake. I drove overnight, you know, and I got a little tired, and so I slept a little, got there rush hour. It was just ridiculous, and I couldn't find Route 20. And I even got out of the car, walked around, no signs for 20. And people kept telling me, oh, it's out at, down the suburbs, you know, it's not in Boston. So I drove out, and Kenmore Square was where the first sign was. And that very first sign was crooked. Here's the longest road in America. Here's the beginning of the route, and there's 20 like that, and west like that, you know, on an angle. And that was it. No big deal, just a crooked sign. So I took off on the road. This time I knew where Route 20 started. So I went Walden Pond, stopped, had a little bite to eat a few blocks away from here, and I walked into Kenmore Square to get a picture of the first Route 20 sign. I couldn't find a Route 20 sign. I go, no, this is happening again, wait a minute. And I looked all around, like 2 blocks around, no Route 20 sign. And finally there was an officer on the sidewalk, and I went up to him, and I said, excuse me, sir, I'm looking for a Route 20 sign. I know 20 starts here, and 20 is the longest road in America, and how come there's no Route 20 signs here? This is Officer Bobby McCarthy, a good Irish cop, or Irish Boston cop. And he said, look at the sidewalk. And the red brick sidewalk, he goes, well, see how nice it is? And look at all the nice shops and the Starbucks here. Well, Boston University controls this area. They want it looking nice for all the money the parents are spending for their kids, He goes, maybe they don't want a Route 20 sign here. I go, what do you mean maybe they don't want a Route 20 sign here? It's the longest road in America. There should be a sign here. And he looks at me, he goes, 26 years I've been a cop. The longest road in America? You got me on that one. I didn't know that. Because you're right, there should be a sign here. So that was the start. Again, 2 times and no signs. Either, hard to find, not where I thought. So there's the first sign. It was 3 blocks away, and now we're ready to head west. Okay. Weekly specials. This was in Waltham. Route 66 omelet, right? That bugs me because everyone talks about Route 60, and this is right on Route 20, right? So I had to go in there. And I asked for the manager, and the owner wasn't in with it. There was a young woman who was the manager at the moment. And I said, look, you've got a Route 66 omelet. I gave the whole thing, Route 21. You should have a Route 20 omelet. Oh, yeah. I said, no, look, seriously, you should have a Route 20 omelet. And could you let the owner know that? She goes, yeah, okay. And that was it. I'm sure they still have a Route 66 on it. The Wayside Inn, Boston Post Road, and Boston Post Road, the old mail road, to the wilderness, out to the west, Springfield, maybe Albany, and Route 20 is there. This is Marlborough, just the City Hall, just beautiful blue sky. And Day and Night Diner, and this is in Palmer, Massachusetts. And see the dip in the board there? That's hard maple, right? You know what that dip is from? That dip is where for 50 years they've been buttering the toast. 50 years, and you know how water wears down rocks, buttered toast wears down hard maple. Well, yeah, 50 years buttering toast in that same spot. Westfield River, and that's Route 90 up above. And I was walking, and you'll see a lot of nature pictures here and people stuff. And I got talking to a guy who was going fishing in the river. He still had his car. And he was a very directed fisherman. This is what he was, a fisherman, right? We got talking. I mentioned Route 20 going all the way across country. It's the longest road. He just looks at me. He goes, that'd be too much fishing for me. Very single-minded. He was a fisherman. Too much, oops, sorry, there we go. I show this picture when I'm out west doing this program. Just a typical New England, the town hall, the church next door, the white gazebo. Anyone know where this is?
Shaker Village.
Yeah, Hancock Shaker Village, and this is the stone circular barn. Just an amazing, amazing place. And just another picture from there, the old window and the colors. And just, does anyone know this place? This is New Lebanon, New York. The first town on 20 going in from Massachusetts. You come down off the Lebanon Hills into the valley. And welcome the abode of the message, this is. And what's real interesting, this is an old Shaker community. I think, I've got to check again, maybe the oldest one in the country. I mean, this, it hasn't been used for ages, but half of the old community is a private school, and the other half is a Sufi community. This is Sufi Muslim community. And they've been there, I think, 30 or so years. So real interesting that this old Shaker community is now partly a Sufi community. And whenever I do programs in New Lebanon, which is every year, I always go and spend a little bit of time. Very beautiful, peaceful place, wonderful gardens. And then the bar and grill. This is an old tugboat brought to the Hudson River in Albany. And the only reason I got that picture is on the '96 trip, I stopped there and took out my Mac computer and sat there and wrote on the boat. And that was the first year they opened, 1996, and they're still around, and I'm still around. So the other thing too, just to mention, on that first trip, I didn't have enough money to do that trip. I'm a poet, and poets are poor. Traditionally, that's the way it goes, And I quit doing other work 20 years ago almost, when I was 43, just to be a poet. And a couple of months after I did that, and we had 2 kids and a third one coming, and I connected 2 words I never connected before. Poetry, and if you add a V and turn a couple letters, poverty. And I think they must have a common root in the language, But I was also, on that trip, even though I didn't have enough money to do it, I was writing an article for the Corning Leader, our local newspaper, and they were paying me $20 a day for an article about the trip. So I had to, it was before laptop days, I had my Mac Classic and carried it around almost like a laptop, with the external modem and all the wires and phone cords. And every day I sent an article out to them and they paid me for it. And I sat and wrote the article on that boat. And, Albany, in Washington Park there in Albany, plan of the Union Avenue, goes back to the 1700s and very historic connection there. The plan of the Union was sort of a model, I think, for when the states did join in Union, back in the 1770s. This was earlier, there was a plan. A friend of mine had to show me this book. It's from 1847. Anyone recognize the name Henry Schoolcraft at all? He wrote one of the first books, this may have been, on Native Americans. But the other real interesting thing is I've done a trip along the Mississippi River from where it starts, Itasca, northern Minnesota, all the way down to below New Orleans, down the Delta. And Schoolcraft was the white person who discovered the source of the Mississippi River, too. So there's a little connection to those 2 journeys of mine. And anyone ever been here? Chuck Wagon Diner. It's toward beyond Guilderland, just west of Guilderland. I've got a quick story here. A friend of mine, Mike Engel, is into these diners, and he knows where everyone is. And, if you're going there, you got to stop at this diner. And he wrote me, he said, this place is having their grand opening. You got to stop there. Visit Tom, the owner, and go stop there. So the Chuck Wagon Diner, right on Route 20, and there's Tom. I liked him right away. He's got a Maine t-shirt on, Acadia is my spiritual home, Acadia National Park. But Tom, those 2 quotes of Thoreau's in the beginning? About dreams? Well, Tom was living his dream. Ever since he was a young man, he wanted to own a diner like this. And he had his own construction business, earned enough money. He bought this diner and spent a whole number of years renovating it. And the sign wasn't with it. The sign had been sold off years ago. And he ended up finding the person who bought the sign, and she delivered it in person from Indiana, I think it was. And this was his grand opening. And he was just like a little kid. I'm just beaming, and his dream had come true. And it doesn't matter how old you are. When you accomplish one of your dreams, you're like a little kid. And Tom was like that. And the old cabins. I think this is near Richfield, I believe. The old cabins, Route 20. Still standing. Haven't been used for a long time, though. Anyone recognize those at all?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah, it's they're right. And then there's some more coming up too. There's Sharon Springs, they've really renovated all those, the Roseboro. There's another big one there too. I forgot what it's called. Americana. And then these are some more ones, motels. And this is that Seago Diner, Motel, Gifts. This one was heated. The motel was heated. This one was. And here's some of the buildings there. And what they've done, I was just by there a week and a half ago, I drove Route 20 out to Albany, and there's some new motels that are part of this now. Some new, was that just in the last year or two? Does anyone know? So it's interesting. The old ones are still there, but they're, you rent 2 rooms, put the kids on the left and the parents stay on the right. And there, story here. Anyone been to Casey's Corner Restaurant and Motel? You have? Okay. This changed the whole trip for me in 1996 and all the rest of my journeying since. The first night on the 96 journey, I slept in the back of the car, Honda Civic wagon. The next night, I grabbed a bite to eat. It was a Friday evening at the diner. And I'm sitting there thinking, where am I going to stay? And I've got to write this article and email it out the next morning. And, it's like I didn't have money for motels. And I had this sudden thought. It was Casey's Corner Restaurant and Motel. So I thought, And I approached the owner. And I went up to him, I talked to him about Route 20, and I said, I'm going to be writing a book about this journey. And if you give me a room for the night, I'll acknowledge you on the acknowledgments page of the book, and then when the book comes out, I'll give you enough copies to cover the cost of the room. He said, sure, why not? So here I got to stay in a motel room for words, just for exchanging words. And I changed the whole trip. On the book, you'll see on the acknowledgments, Casey's Corner Restaurant and Motel, Canfield Hotel, Bontemps Motel, Prairie View Campground, and I bartered along the way, and I still do that now. I still do that as I travel, and right now, if I'm heading back home tonight, and I have places I could stay with some folks who offered, but if I didn't have a place to stay right now, I would say if anyone wants to, you got a spare couch, I'll give you a couple books of poetry for a place to stay. And it's wonderful the experiences you have that way. And that also,
where is that?
This is East Springfield, Springfield, yeah. And that bartering ties me back into the hitchhiking days. Those 30,000 miles I hitchhiked, probably a third of the time I stayed in people's houses without ever asking anybody. People would just offer to put you up. It's just amazing experiences that way. Route 20 Diner, this is a little bit further, and that wasn't there in 1996. I noticed there's more, at least 20 recognition, at least in the tourist things, the restaurants and that, and it's getting more noticed now as a historic route. Do you know this place? Madison. I'm stopped at a red light. It was a Sunday. The place was closed, and I'm looking, tattoo, body piercing, broken bones. So I couldn't figure that out. That is like, I don't want tattoos or body piercing, but certainly don't want broken bones. Well, anyway, I posted that picture on the web. The next day, somebody wrote to me and said, that's the name of the place, Broken Bones Tattoo. And I went by a year later, it was gone. I think that was a bad name. I think that wasn't the best name. And this, come on. Yeah, this intersection. This is looking east though, 11 and 20. And who knows where Route 11 starts and ends? Anybody?
It starts above Plattsburgh.
Yeah, up by Lake Champlain, Canadian border. Do you know where it ends? New Orleans, yeah. So it goes from French-Canadian country down to Cajun country. And I said, I've got to do that trip one of these days, one of these years. So Route 11, yeah. And you know all this stuff, Underground Railroad, Skinny Atlas. It's interesting when I present this program out west, all the way up to Dubuque, I always get some people saying, oh yeah, we had an Underground Railroad here. But once you get past the Mississippi, you're not in the direct line north-south, later settlement, and you don't have that Underground Railroad history anymore. Finger Lakes Drive-In, I'm sure all of you have seen Hot Tub Time Machine. We have it on our Netflix queue. I've got to watch that sometime. Some people say it's a pretty good movie. And this site, Seneca Falls, obviously. This is, if you're not familiar with this commemorates Amelia Bloomer introducing Elizabeth Cady Stanton to Susan B. Anthony in Seneca Falls. Momentous occurrence. Waterloo, birthplace of Memorial Day. Canandaigua. These are old fish and boat shacks on the pier at Canandaigua, and these are part of the National Historic Register. I think there's like 3 rows of these that go back to the 1900 era, and they're really kept up nicely. It's a big scene for painters to go paint from there. And I took this picture because Northern Spy, anyone familiar with Northern Spy apples? Wonderful old variety, great pies, nice big tart apple, and that's where it came from, East Bloomfield. Canada-Chiraga go, at the forks of the trail. You know, this is, you know, part of Seneca territory, you know. Anyone know what this commemorates? Westfield, New York. I didn't know. I'm driving by, and this is right next to Route 20, right in the center of town. Obviously, that's Abraham Lincoln. And that's the little girl who wrote to him saying he should grow a beard. She's the one who wrote a letter to him suggesting that. And he grew a beard, won the election. And on the way to the inauguration, on the train, they stopped in Westfield. And there's a big, you know, a lot of people were waiting for him, and the girl was there. And he asked for her to come up. And I just love that. She's like, oh, you know, dropped the rose. And just, you know, wonderful. Lincoln without a beard would not be Lincoln. The vineyards in Lake Erie, this is in northeast PA. Yeah, I saw that, and I was curious about it. And this is right near Erie, one of the little towns before Erie. And I stopped, and the newspaper was interviewing me in Erie, PA. And I asked about this, and she said 3 young children died in a car crash there. It's right opposite a Walmart entrance on Route 20. And she said, very dangerous intersection, so that's what that was about. The 2 longest roads in America run together for a little while in East Cleveland. Route 6 starts at Cape Provincetown, and it used to be the longest road, Route 6. Provincetown to maybe San Jose in California, I think. But what they did, and 20 was the second longest, they decommissioned most of California, Route 6, I think back in the 40s maybe, and then Route 20 became the longest road. Route 6 is the second longest road in America. So they run together for a little bit in East Cleveland, and that's the Cleveland skyline from beyond Cleveland. In these greenhouses in Kipton, Ohio, acres and acres of these greenhouses. And what I learned was they grow for the big boxes like Lowe's and Home Depot and all those big stores. This is where a lot of their flowers come from. But acres and acres of greenhouses. Norwalk, Ohio. There's a Depot Street, and I write about this in the book, you know, Depot Street, the old railroad buildings, and no tracks anymore. And that has happened so much across America. You know, the tracks are gone. You know, they're bikeways now, or just growing wild. And that's one of those sad things, I think, that the trains. Ever have Heinz ketchup? Fremont, Ohio, Heinz ketchup, Heinz 57. This is where the ketchup comes from. And I gave a reading in Fremont, and then they told me when you go through the next town, Woodville, it's a real speed trap, 25 miles per hour. Do not speed when you go through there. They're always watching. So, okay, I'm sorry, that's the next picture. This is on the way there, Lower Sandusky and Perrysburg. This goes back to 1842. These were mileage markers. And there's still a lot of those still standing along Route 20. But it goes back 1842, so that's what, 172 years ago? And a number of them are still there. 12 miles one way, and the other one, it's hard to read what that was, 15. But there's still a number of these standing. And here's Woodville, and the speed trap town. And it's like I had just eaten, so I would have stopped in there, but I wasn't hungry. But look at that. Yeah, what does that car remind you of? Any old TV show? I'm not a TV guy, but it reminded me of Car 54, Where Are You? I don't know why, but it did. And the Maumee Theater. This is the edge of Toledo. And I passed that theater a lot during the daytime, never at night. This is the first time at night. And just, love, the lighting and that. But this is where the journey ended that first year. And then I went back and continued the next year, West 20, Ohio, through farmland, a lot of the old buildings falling down, the old farm buildings and that. Still farmland. And this was intriguing. Angola, Indiana. This is the library. And I wanted to get a picture of the library because on the original journey, a year after when I wrote the book and the book came out, I went west with my 6-year-old son for a whole month. And just father and son on the road promoting the book. And we showed up at those motels that bartered for a room, and not one of those owners thought they'd ever see me again. It's like, wow, you've got books for me, great, you did it, But when we got to Angola, Grayson had been creating poems, and we made a little book for him to sell at the readings. And he got up at 6 years old and recited one of his poems in this library. So I wanted to get a picture of the library, and I went, and it's a new library. And I walked in, and this is the old library within the new library. It was an old Carnegie library, And they needed a new library, but they couldn't bear to tear that one down. So they ended up building the other one all around it. So the old building is within the new, and they still use it for the reference and historical room and that. And what a great way to preserve the building, you know? And I live with mostly old order Amish neighbors, and this is in Indiana there too, LaGrange, and the whole one block here is just railings and these watering troughs every 30 feet or so for the horses. Big Amish community there. New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana. And I had a tour there, well, you know, and Tom, and another Tom, toured me around, and I said, I need a picture, Tom. Where do you want the picture? Oh, from the engine, you know. And he had to stand on that. And he said, we got this from Texas. He said, somehow it ended down there in Texas, and we ended up bringing it up here. And this was his baby. This was his baby. But look at those, aren't they immense? Those old steam engines, just amazing. And the Lincoln Way. This is in South Bend, and the west side of the city, and Route 20 is part of the old Lincoln Way. The Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway was the first first national thing of anything named for Lincoln, actually. I think it was maybe 1913 or so. It was before the U.S. highway system in the 20s got developed, and the Lincoln Highway, they called it. I passed another marker for that. Last year, from August to November, I did a 14-week journey on all 48 states in America. I gave a poetry reading in each of the 48 states. And there was an old Lincoln Highway marker, like the other ones, those old cement ones, down in somewhere in the Southwest. I can't remember where it was even. No, in California. It was in Davis, California. There was the old marker there, still standing, of the Lincoln Highway. Indiana Dunes National Lake Shore, Lake Michigan, just an amazing, beautiful place. You never expect something like this there. And I took a hike on the dunes, and that's Lake Michigan. I'm into the flowers in that. This is bearberry. I'd never seen that before. Very much like blueberry flowers, but bearberry. And this is the trail going down to the lake. And you get to the shore of the lake, and if you look left, there's Gary, and Chicago would be further out to the right, and you probably can't see it even if it was, visible. But this is I talked to a ranger there, and this is, I think, the most visited national recreation site or something in America, because it's by so much population, very, very close. And a hike in one of the Cook County National Forest. Anyone into wildflowers? Anyone know what this is? White baneberry, or doll's eyes, they were called sometimes. And that's wild phlox. Wild geranium, or Cranesville. And these were all blooming there. It was a very wet spring that year, too, in 2011. Remember the Rapture? This was in Illinois, northwestern Illinois. Rapture party at 6, and I was there earlier, so I don't know if they had a great time or not. But, they did survive it, I guess. And look at the lilacs. And this was like in spring. It was a very wet spring, all the way across the North Country, all the way out west even. And I had to stop to get a picture of the lilacs. Well, look at that. Look at that. I don't have any information about that. It's just there, I don't know, in part of a farm at some point, but there's nothing else more around there. There's no sign, so I've got to look into that. Marengo, Illinois. And this is the City Hall in Freeport, Illinois. And look at the names on the top of that City Hall. Chaucer, Spencer, Shakespeare, Dante, and then all around, there were just these, what a wonderful thing to have on your City Hall, Galena, Illinois, anyone ever been there? Galena, very historic town. 8 Civil War, I think it's 8 Civil War generals came from here, including Ulysses Grant. And it's a very historic town. But somebody told me I had to stop there, and I've got to read you a haiku. Just take a minute here to find it. Okay. Again, I didn't have enough money to do the trip, right? So I read a lot of haikus. So this is my haiku from Galena. Brick buildings line street, storefronts displaying things, loose change in pocket. I'm not a shopper, It's beautiful, but it's all retail and restaurants and spend money, And the Canfield Hotel, I got there at night, and that's a place I bartered the first time around, the Canfield Hotel, Dubuque, Iowa. So this time I went in, I said, I wonder if they barter again. And this is 15 years later. same owners. I walked in, they looked at me, oh, you want to borrow a room again? They remembered me. I said, sure, that's why I'm stopping. Well, sure, we got a place for you, you know. And then he talked me into staying 2 nights. You know, we had wonderful conversations and talked me into staying 2 nights in Canfield. And this is Dubuque, Iowa, and that has changed too. They've got a real nice park area along the Mississippi now. And every year they commission 10 new sculptures to put up there. And that wasn't the case back in '96. And this is not a sculpture, just I took a morning walk along the Mississippi and one of the lamps and the moon. And not a sculpture, real live blue heron along the Mississippi. And this is my favorite, no, not here. Towboat pushing coal, a lot of coal is moved along the river there. And this is my favorite sculpture. This is about 30 feet up on this pole in the dragonfly. And that was one of the 10 sculptures that year. And early spring, well, it was late spring because it was so wet. This is the corn, you know, Iowa and the corn just, you know, so high, a few inches high. But it was late because of the wetness of the year. But Route 20 is changing. In Iowa, when I first did the trip, it was just the old Route 20. Now, 2/3 of the way across the state, it's a 4-lane. You know, and they're, you know, you can zip from the 350 miles from Dubuque to Sioux City in, what, 5 hours now, 4.5 hours, before it would take you 8 or more hours. But again, you lose something. You know, and the towns in Iowa are just so beautiful, I think, too. And so this is coming, it's going to be all the way across the state soon. Something else I didn't see in 1996, a lot of wind farms around the country, you know. That's Iowa. This is Sioux City, South Sioux City, Nebraska. And again, something new. There was a Lewis and Clark Center there, interpretive center. And it was closed, so I didn't get to go in, but this was you know, one of the statues. And this was the only prairie dog I saw on that trip. I didn't see a lot of them. Only this is the only one. But there's a book I don't have, it's out of print. I got to recite this haiku. It's called Zoo Haiku. It's out of print right now, but it's drawings and haiku from the Minnesota Zoo. And there was a prairie dog there in Minnesota. Let's see. Prairie dog on hind legs, lets out it's not right, lets out a sharp bark, falls over backwards. I'm watching, and then right on his back. And I love it when you see animals seeming a little clumsy too. You know, it's like they're not perfect. And this is Pedro. As I was walking around the interpretive grounds, I kept hearing someone playing a saxophone. And then when I was done, I went to look for that. This is Pedro. He works for Goodwill. And 2 or 3 times a week, he comes out to this little shelter just to play a saxophone. And he played a song for me. And then I asked him if he knew Sonny Rollins. Anyone here familiar with Sonny Rollins? Saxophone, jazz saxophonist. Well, so I told him Sonny Rollins took 2 different times he took a hiatus from performing and recording. And from what I remember reading, every night he was in New York, he would go out on one of the bridges and play his saxophone. And so that's what you made me think of as you were playing out here. And he didn't know Sonny Rollins. I said, check him out. This is a memorial just off of Route 20. And I write about meeting this person in 1996 in the book here. I gave a reading in Sioux City at a coffee house. And I read a bunch of poems about traveling. This was in '96. And this woman came up to me afterwards, Barbara. And she said, your reading so inspired me that I'm going to buy my own motorcycle, and I want to travel around the country, explore the country, and not on the back. I want my own motorcycle, and I'm going to ride it. And it was so, you know, really nice to hear that. And then the next year I ended up visiting, I was out there and I stayed with her. And then she started traveling and exploring a bit of Route 20 from different directions. And then we got out of touch. And before I was doing this journey in spring, I tried to find her again. And the only information I found was about this memorial. And it was a couple of miles off of Route 20, a few miles. And it turned out I inquired, and she wasn't on a motorcycle, but she ended up on a small country road, head-on with a truck. And I was like, no. So I was working on a book about this journey, and I was going to dedicate it to her. I don't know if the book's going to happen, because a year and a half ago we had a house fire, and we lost everything. All my journals. It was a complete loss of everything we own. And so all the journals from these journeys are gone, so I'm not sure if the book's going to happen. This may be what it is from the show, from that journey. Sentinels of the Prairie, Nebraska. Just these private people, they own a waste refuge place or whatever, but they set up this roadside museum of restored windmills. Just beautiful, and most of these are from the area. And here's a picture of one of them. And they've got beautiful signs they made explaining, saying where it's from and that. Well, look at the art. You know, just the beauty, functional and yet also beautifully done. You know, and there's the, another one, the Perkins. They had maybe 25 or 30 of these set up here, right along Route 20. More cabins going back to Earth, the old days. And I love this, the old and new technology. There's the windmill. This is for the cattle, you know, for bringing up water for the cattle. And there's the solar collector. And what some people said is actually a lot of the windmills are just there now. The water's pumped up by electric pumps for the solar collectors. Yeah, but I love the juxtaposition of the two. Bassett, Nebraska, Phillips 66, old restored. It's not being used, of course, but restored to what it was like. What would you say, 1940s maybe? Or
Earlier.
maybe even earlier? Yeah. Earlier, 30s maybe? Yeah, okay. Ainsworth, Nebraska. This fountain was in front of the Historical Society there. It was by the library. I gave a reading there. But this used to be on the main street of Ainsworth. And you've got the people fountain, something's missing. They couldn't find it. It disappeared. You got the people fountain, you got the cat and the dog ones, and on the back, the horse trough is missing. So you could, you know, your cat, dog, horse, and you could all get a drink on Main Street. You know? But that disappeared. And this is Niobrara River, one of the train trestles going over. U.S. Post Office, Rushville, 1885. And that, again, that difference between the West and the East, you know, so much older here in terms of white settlement anyway. And here, this was the post office, 1885. How old is this building?
1840s, maybe?
What, when?
Maybe 1840s.
1840 or so? I was thinking it was probably older than this post office.
Way older.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And the Museum of the Fur Trade, look at those snowshoes. Just amazing. And like they told me, I asked them, how come so big? Very dry, light, flaky snow. And, regular snowshoes you would still sink in, so you needed these. It was just amazing. Can you try it? It's like, I don't know. I think I'd fall a few times easily. And this is a fur trader's cabin. And Trunk Butte. I knew I was in the West. And when I did the journey in '96, I write about this in the book. I never traveled west. All that hitchhiking was to the east. So this is the first time going west. And as I was going west, I'm thinking, when am I going to be in the West? When am I going to be in the West? And I thought maybe when I cross the Mississippi. Yeah. I sat on the west side of the Mississippi for 40 minutes looking east, thinking about, it's a major crossing, the Mississippi River, but I'm still in the east, Then I thought maybe the Missouri River. Got to the other side of the Missouri River. It's like dairy farms here, rolling hills and dairy farms. Looks just like here. But once you get halfway, 2/3 of the way across Nebraska, you run into the sandhills. And once you get to the sandhills, this is different than the previous 1,800 miles. Totally different. And I was in the West finally. And this is one of the buttes in Nebraska. And that's Chadron, Nebraska. Early morning, it was misty, and this is the main street going into town. And that's the view right opposite town, Chadron. Then I stopped at Fort Robinson, very western Nebraska, State Park. And this is the spot where Crazy Horse was killed, where he was murdered. And I've stopped there. Every time I go by there, I stop there and pay my respects. Then I took a hike at Fort Robinson. And this is the dry sand hills, but amazing the flowers that were there, because it was a wet spring. This is some kind of a lily. Again, I've lost my notes that were in my journal, so I need to look them up again. Another flower from there. Just beautiful flowers. And then you look at the terrain, though. It's all these ridges and very dry, but then you run into these just amazing flowers here and there. And this is, I was hiking along these ridges. There's no flowers there. It's dry, but then you run into those. But yeah, wonderful hiking on these ridges. In Wyoming, Van Tassel, population 18, elevation 4,736. And when I was there the first time, just to get it right, I don't want to trust my memory, 1996, Van Tassel, population 8. Elevation was the same though. So from 96, in 15 years, the population more than doubled. It went from 8 to 18. So, you know, somebody said it's probably just one family though, you know. But I was by there last year on this 48 state tour I did, and the population I think was down to 15. So, but then the next town, this is the first town on 20 in Wyoming. The next town, Lost Springs, population 4. And hi, Lost Springs welcomes you, right? And there's one house, you can see a house, and there's a tavern and a house, and then there's this building. And that's Lost Springs, that's all of Lost Springs. I love how the chimney just didn't want to come all the way down. You know? Just, I'm going to rest here, okay? And Douglas, Wyoming, the jackalope. Jackalopes. Douglas is the jackalope capital of Wyoming. Everywhere you go, any building you go, there's a jackalope. Small ones, big ones, they're just all over the town. Oh, and this was the Chamber of Commerce, and they had a little train museum too. And that yellow car is one of, they said there's not many wooden dining cars still around. That was a wooden dining car. And then this was their steam engine that they had. Again, monsters. Rock in the Glen. This is in Wyoming. And Kit Carson and others passed through this way, the old travelers going west. And let me read a haiku and a paragraph from the book. And names are carved on that rock, that big rock. There's names, in fact, let me go to the next picture. And this is 1879, somebody's name, J.R. Davis. And there's names from, you know, going way back into the 1800s. But here's what I wrote when I went by there the first time. The haiku first and then paragraph. Standing by Glen Rock, settlers' names carved in sandstone, white clouds drifting by. All life moves, but the rocks seem to stand still, an illusion, a time scale much different than what we relate to. Settlers passing by 160 years ago in horse-drawn wagons, I traveling through in an old beat car. The rocks sit, slowly move in their own way to someplace further on. And I love the old theaters. This is in Casper, Wyoming. There's the America Theater. What decade would you say? Just like in the 30s or 40s? Or earlier? Any sense of that? No. I didn't look this one up.
Because they have a new front on it.
Yeah.
That white thing is new.
Yeah, but with the sign and all that, I'm assuming that was original. And then a block away is the Rialto Theater. And this one was built in 1919, you know, still in operation. Block away. And then Lou Talbert Ranch Outfitters. I was out west. I'm not a Westerner, but I had to stop at an outfitting store. So I stopped in there, and look at all the hats. That's just one little corner of the store. It's a whole room, just boots, you know, just boots. But I got talking to the manager, and he said, you know, people come from 300 miles around. This is the biggest place. Opened in 1919. He said, we've got anything anyone needs, and they come from hundreds of miles. Wind River Canyon. This is Route 20 running through the Wind River Canyon in Wyoming. And Hot Springs State Park. And that's the swaying bridge. And I love walking on that, but even more, I love sitting on a bench nearby and watching people go on it. And you know, some people take a few steps and whoa, I'm not going there. And it's just fascinating. We've got a little story I want to tell you from this park. There's a yellow-bellied marmot, and I took a hike here again too. These are western forget-me-nots. A lark sparrow, I had never seen one of those. Really love that pattern on the face. And this is Monument Hill. I took a hike up to the top of that hill. And again, look how dry it looks. But as you hike, you know, there's another lily of some sort. Look at this flower. Just, again, in that dry terrain. And there's the view from the top. And that's the Bighorn Mountains looking south. Route 20 goes north. That's the Bighorns looking south. And there's a road that goes over those. It opens maybe in late June and then closes in September. I rode over that one time, and up there, the reason I drove that is it was just had opened. There's an old medicine circle there that you have to hike into for about a mile. You drive a mile and a half on a dirt road and hike a mile, and it's at the edge of a big cliff, and they don't know how, it's hundreds and hundreds of years for about an hour. On the west side, I was able to come in from that, and this is the Madison River, and this is all maybe an hour and a half. Might have been an hour and a half. This is a pelican in the river. There's the fishermen in the mountains. And when I was a kid growing up in Buffalo, I used to trout fish. You remember Field and Stream and Sports Afield magazines? Do they still print those?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I used to get them, and I'd see pictures like this of fishing out west. Think, oh, I got to go there someday. You know, here I am. Not fishing though. Caribou or elk. I'm sorry, elk. I said caribou. I didn't think elk. One of the squirrels. Some animals don't make it through winter. Another ground squirrel. Like a chipmunk. This is Tower Geyser. And this is all like in an hour and a half in Yellowstone. Just bison, calf. And then welcome to Idaho. This is the Targhee Pass, Targhee. It's the Continental Divide. And Chief Joseph passed through here. Does anyone know the story of Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce Indians? They were followed by 2 different battalions of army trying to capture them. They were from Washington, and they were trying to get to Canada. And eventually there was a storm. They surrendered before getting to Canada after months of being tracked and not being able to get caught. And Chief Joseph gave a very famous speech. And one of the lines in it, "From where the sun now sets, I will fight no more forever." And very, very moving. And he never was able to go back to his homeland. And the Tetons, you come down out of Wyoming, Montana, that little notch in Montana, you come down into the agricultural area of East Idaho, and that's the Tetons looking back to the east. And Idaho Falls, the city of Idaho Falls, and people said, this is horrible this year. There was so much rain, there's no waterfall, because there's just too much water in the river. And that's a Mormon temple in the background. You can see a big Mormon temple. And I did a hike by the Craters of the Moon National Monument. Miles and miles and miles as you drive 20 in Idaho, it's all lava rock. Just covering the ground as far as you can see. And I was hiking, and this is a gopher snake. It was in a little crevice, actually, and like I said, I gotta watch where I step and put my hands. Non-poisonous, though. But even in this, look at this, this is what the terrain's like, and that's getting beyond the lava out there, but this just covered like this for miles and miles. But even in that blackness, things like this grow, you know? There's always beauty coming out in color and life that tries to come out wherever. And these were the only ones I saw on the journey. And what song did I start singing when I saw them?
Rudolph.
No, not Rudolph, no.
No.
Home on the Range, yeah, Home on the Range, yeah. And I'm a horrible singer, but I'm great when I'm alone, you know. And the Log Cabin Literary Center, I've got to stop and tell you a story. We're getting close to the end here. This is Boise, Idaho. Well, before I tell you that story, let me show you a couple more pictures of Boise. This is the Capitol building, the mountains in the background. They have a wonderful human rights memorial, an Anne Frank memorial in downtown Boise. Every time I go there, I say, I wasn't there in '96, this is new since then. And there's always, I spend an hour there or so, and there are always some tears come to my eyes as I go through and read what's written on these ones. But I had to put Thoreau's quote up there. Okay, yeah, let me go back now. So the Log Cabin Literary Center, I gave a reading there on the first journey. And real interesting. It was my second last reading of the trip. I didn't have enough money to get home, you know. Thinking, okay, hopefully I'll sell enough books. And the Idaho Press Club was having dinner there before my reading, and they invited me to come. And so within 10 minutes of talking to the press people, they corrected my speech. Okay. I was saying Boise, and they said it's Boise. But they said, more importantly, tomorrow, when you cross the border, do not say Oregon in Oregon. I go, what? They said, do not say Oregon in Oregon. You're saying Oregon, and they do not like you to say Oregon in Oregon. Okay, okay, so gave the reading. Next morning I headed out to Oregon. And I crossed over. Welcome to Nissa, the first town in Oregon in 20. Thunder egg. Ever hear of thunder eggs? I never had either until the first trip. This is a thunder egg. It's sort of like a geode or whatever. Yeah, but it's different. It's formed differently. But and you can find these in the rocks around there. So the story I've got to finish with now. So the next morning in '96, again, I don't have enough money to get home. I get into Oregon, and within 10 minutes, the siren and the lights. And I get pulled over. I don't have money, and the officer comes up to me, and I say, yeah, officer, why'd you stop me? I wasn't speeding, because I don't speed, and I'm careful about that. I wasn't speeding. No, you weren't speeding, but you don't have any stickers on your license plate. I said, well, I'm from New York, and I point to the windshield. You know, our stickers are up here, registration, inspection. Well, let me see your license and registration. So I give it to him. He goes back to his car. 10 minutes he's in his car. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm trying to write in my journal, but my mind's thinking about that, you know, and oh, gee. Well, he comes back, he comes to the window, and he hands me my license and registration. It says, this is a quote, and again, I write about it in the book, well, Michael, I can't write you up for anything, so I'm just going to have to give you a verbal warning. A verbal warning for what? I haven't done anything wrong. And he says, quote, I know, but I still have to warn you. It's like, I love to understand things, you know? I said, I don't need to understand this. He's giving me my license back and I can go, you know? Then when I got to Corvallis, I gave a reading in Corvallis and I mentioned that. They said, oh, that's Eastern Oregon. You had New York license plates, you got an old beat car, and you got long hair. He had to stop you. He had to. And again, on numerous journeys I've taken, I end up running into the old Japanese internment camps. You know, there's one there by Ontario, Oregon, there's one Cody, Wyoming, there's one down in Arkansas that I've been by, and again, always a sad thing. But they do have a museum here and a Japanese garden out back, too. It was real early, things weren't growing too much yet, but I've been there when things are growing. It's just a beautiful garden. And again, bartering for rooms, you know? Well, Dr. D, I was 2 days in Ontario. I gave a reading at the college and then a reading at the library, public library. And the first night, the library covered my room at a motel. But the second day, I was reading at the college in the afternoon. Dr. D shows up. He was at my reading the night before. And he was, oh, you got a place to stay for the night? I said, oh, no, not yet. Well, you're staying with me. Come home with me tonight. You know, and he lives with his daughter. He's 82 or 83 he was then. This is 3 years ago. And he was the doctor, and he wrote a book all about being a doctor in this rural area of Eastern Oregon for like, 40 years. You know, I could show you a half hour of pictures right there. Just, you know what my second favorite, I'm not ranking first and second, but my two favorite stretches are Route 20. That is one of them, and the other one is the stretch from just east of Auburn to Albany. Just this stretch up here is just beautiful. The rolling hills, the little villages. It's one of the places I bartered. But the only place I got turned down on that whole trip about bartering was in Sisters, Oregon. I got into town early. I wanted to get a place to stay and then go hiking in the mountains for the rest of the day. So there's a little Sisters Motor Lodge, nice small little place. That's usually how we go to places like that. And there was a note on the door, be back at 1 o'clock, and so it was 1:45. So I went out, and the car pulled up at 1 o'clock. I was sitting at a table writing, and these two women came out, the owners, and one walked up to me, the other went in the office, and I said about bartering. Sure, we'll barter for a room. So as we're walking towards the office, she stops, looks at me, says, you do have a credit card, don't you? And I go, no, I don't have a credit card. We're just bartering for a room. Why do we need a credit card? Well, you know. I said, look, no, I don't. Look, I can call a friend. She'll give you her credit card number over the phone. No, it's got to be yours. I'm sorry, I just can't do this. And she's getting all flustered, says how she helps poor people when she can and all that. And I said, thank you, and I walked away. And I felt a little down, my first rejection. And, do I need a piece of plastic to show the goodness inside? Is that what I need? And anyway, I was walking around town thinking, okay, I gotta find another place. And I stopped in a little bookstore, and there's this beautiful book of Chinese poetry that I didn't have. And I don't have enough money to get home, right? And gee, if I had a piece of plastic, I could buy that. It crossed my mind, thinking, that's ironic. But anyway, I got talking to him. He goes, go to the Conklin guest house. They might be interested in bartering. I explained the situation. So I pull up to this beautiful guest house. And this is the only nice picture I could get in 2011. The rest of it's almost run down and gone. It's a sad story. But I go up to this beautiful guest house and gardens and gazebo and pond, and not the kind of place I would barter, but what the heck. And I go and there's two people sitting on the porch, Frank and Marie. Turns out they're the owners. I explained it to them. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll give you a room. The small one, 3 beds. Bathroom is down the hall though, And I get this beautiful, luxurious country place. I put my stuff in the room, I go out hiking, come back, an hour after dark. There's wine and cheese and crackers waiting for me in my room, And the next morning, Frank fixed this wonderful breakfast, and there's a couple from New York City rock climbing. We had a great talk, and then, after breakfast, I'm going upstairs, and Frank goes, hey, Mike, get packed up, and before you leave, though, come see me. I want to talk to you. So I get all packed up, and I go find Frank in the kitchen. And I said, yeah, Frank, what do you want? He goes, well, I know you've got to get going. You've got a reading in Corvallis tonight. But I was wondering, maybe before you left, maybe you'd want to see the mountains from the air. My plane's just across the road.
Oh, my
I said, really? He goes, yeah, come on, you want to go? I said, sure, I'd love to. Really? He goes, yeah, come on, let's go. So, he's prepping the plane and talking. And when we got up, once I got comfortable, I'm not a plane guy, Once we got up, and I'm looking down at those mountains, First thing I did was I thanked that woman for rejecting me, because you never know how things are going to turn out. And it's like, wow, what an experience, And those are the mountains. I took this picture only because the clouds, that's the west side of the mountains. This side is the east. The Cascades are that, they block the precipitation. The west side is very wet, the east side is dry. And that's an example of how the clouds just hang on that west side. Don't make it over. This is they told me, a small Douglas fir tree. This is a small one. It's amazing, the trees out west. I just love the pattern. This is some kind of a western maple. And the Straw Palace, Albany, Oregon, we're near the end now. Just a big pole barn that, and it's like maybe 200 feet long or so. Just a beautiful building. And this is in Albany. And they're making a community carousel. It's a community project. And people volunteer to come in to carve. They've never carved, maybe they have a master carver who teaches them. They've got a master painter or whatever. And they're making this community carousel. And it's just a wonderful project. I got talking to this guy. He said, yeah, I've never done anything like this before. This sounded so intriguing. And I'm learning a little skill that, maybe I'll carve on my own when I'm done, And this is the director of the project, and that was her favorite one, forever. And it's going to be like that in this whole carousel. And grassroots books and music, I took a picture of this because that was my last reading in '96, where I didn't have enough money to get home. It's still around, an independent bookstore, yay, still hanging there, And when I gave the reading there, Mike, who introduced me, it was, I had a few books to sell, and it was donations, passing the hat. And I remember him, he said, when he passed the hat, he goes, look, we don't want Mike to get stuck in Chicago on the way back, so keep that in mind, right? So anyway, when I got out of there, I finished the trip, I looked at what money I had, figured out how many miles driving the expressways, going back, getting home quick, and I said, I'm going for it. And I ended up arriving home with $3 in my pocket and a quarter tank of gas. So and then this is the ending, this is the Yakima River. And whenever I do these journeys across, and I've done various journeys, the Mississippi River, Route 62 from Niagara Falls to El Paso, Route 2 from Maine out to Washington. It breaks though from Lake Champlain. It ends where Route 11 is, Route 2. Then it starts at the Mackinac Bridge. It goes out all the way to Washington, Everett, Washington. Whenever I do these journeys, there's always that little sadness that last day. I know the journey, you look forward to something, you plan something, and like a good book, you get to those last pages, you don't want to end, And I feel that way on the journeys all the time. So I lingered and stood on this bridge looking at the river for a while, and then this is the end of Route 20. At least here, they've got
We've got
begin East 20. Boston, you know, they don't even have a sign there, you know? So, but I like this, Toledo, 7 miles, Corvallis, 53. What I've realized doing this program, underneath Corvallis should be Boston, 3,265 miles. And someone who lives in Newport, she just came out on a train, she's a poet, we just published a book of hers, and she's in the middle of a 30-day train ride around America, and she and I gave a reading together. She's from Newport. And she said, you know, Michael, I'm going to start pursuing that when I get back home. You know, they need to put that Boston on that sign. And then this is the ocean, the Pacific. And that first time, you know, I'd never gone west, and here I am at the Pacific, and I couldn't see it. The fog was so thick, I had to walk up right to the water to just be able to see a little bit of it. It was so thick. But this was not a foggy day, just that great Pacific Ocean. And this is only 2 blocks from there, 2 blocks from where Route 20 ends. And then if you stand there and look off to the right, there's the Knocking Head Lighthouse, and that's the Pacific at the end of Route 20. So there you go, you've traveled the route. You all went cross country here.